Severely disturbed and with a more than heavy gut feeling, I dug deeper what exactly she meant with explicitly the next weeks. Because until now it sounded romantic on one side, but also intangible on the other. Chloe, as I promised, I will accompany you, but what exactly are you talking about? I don't fully understand. I mean, I can, but there is no real coherence. I lowered my head helplessly and felt consecutively how she laid her hand on my head. I felt her then coming closer until I could feel her breath. She proceeded and approached the left side of my ear when she whispered, 11 weeks. I started to look at her while frowning appalled. She repeated, they gave me 11 weeks. I slightly started shaking my head shortly before I noticed something breaking inside me. Like a stone that is being thrown against a window so that it bursts into 1,000 fragments. And it was deepest winter because through the window came drafts of Arctic cold air. Lastly, that explained probably the shivers I got. I was kind of frozen, paralyzed, as I couldn't move 1 centimeter. The thing that broke inside me was my world with any hope, any belief and endeavor. It resulted in my entire system going in a shutdown mode, where I only wanted to be left alone. I was surrounded by high walls that left no space for anyone else, not even Chloe. And that manifested in the physical when I raised myself and pressed my sleeve against my eyes. I also raised my head so that the tears didn't fall onto the floor, potentially causing me to slip. Out of the situation, I only saw the escape sign close to me, sticking to the analogy. When that one room with broken windows was frozen out, I better ran and searched for another room to find shelter in. And further, I favorably sealed the door behind me, so that the chills didn't follow me. That manifested in me escaping from the bed Chloe was situated on, and rushing towards the door. By doing so, I hit the bed with my knee, which resulted in an agonizing hissing sound that was probably not separately discernible from my sobbing. When I reached the door, I swung it open wide and closed it behind me, without dedicating one last look at Chloe. In fact, I didn't know what exactly I was doing, as I had my mind anywhere but in this dimension. Later on, I found myself sitting on the visitor's chair, not too far away from the room. As mentioned, it didn't matter where I was, only that I was alone there. In the meantime, my sleeves had become soaked through, for I had no tissue to compensate. It felt almost like swimming with clothes, but how in the world could I have reckoned with that? By the way, her parents most likely couldn't anticipate that either, and therefore they had to deal with the same shock as I. Because after all, there was no space left for interpretation, even for the most creative minds who knew how to fill semantic blank space. They were sitting right outside 511, as I saw when I caught a glimpse through my spread fingers. It resulted in a perfect picture being present before my eyes, even though I looked at them for only a split second. I saw them floating in front of me, as if I had an eidetic memory, and further, I saw myself in them. Dr. Bush and Jessica were standing next to them, desperately trying to comfort them, but in the single frame I had, it seemed to be to no avail. Whether they noticed me sitting not too far away, I couldn't tell, as I was occupied with something else. Her parents had always been close to her, and of course, for them it was everything but easy. But at the same time I doubted that my grief over Chloe was less severe than theirs. After all, her parents were bound with her through blood and flesh, while we were bound through the soul. And that established the compensation, saying that both parties had their retreat to secondarily get along with it, but primarily to cry themselves out, not even mentioning to accept it. By now I felt the tears running dry, maybe a consequence of dehydration, which concluded in a stinging head and eye ache. Since my sobbing was muted just like the tears, I was then able to perceive the footsteps of other people, like nurses and doctors. They didn't seem to consciously notice for what I was clad, but at some point, while I was still bowed forth with my head on my knees, I felt some of those steps coming suspiciously close, so that I created artificial composure by pretending to breathe deeply, as if I was tired or so. I was not by any means bent on a conversation a la let's talk about it, no matter with whom. I wanted my personal isolation, and that's about it. But against all odds, I suddenly perceived a light tapping on my back, as I was still in kind of an upright embryo position, being curled up while sitting. Out of the moment, I shrank back, but at the same time tried to cover up any traces of desperation, like my presumed red glowing eyes. At some point, I became so unnerved that I dared to look up to see who it was, or rather what he or she wanted, mainly to regain my privacy as fast as possible. After blinking a couple of times to resolve the veil that had wrapped my eyes into blur, I ultimately saw who approached me. A man in his 30s stood in front of me, whereby I had to confess to not rely on my age evaluation faculty too much, as it left me in the lurk last time. However, this mid-aged man, to widen the margin, had brown short hair and a corresponding beard and was solely looking at me. He tried to smile a bit, but even if he had managed to do so, I likely would have taken him for an enemy, as such expressions were foreign to me. I stared at him without saying or doing anything further. He stuttered at first, but verbalized his thoughts then more securely. Hello, you must be Aaron, right? Kind of confused, I replied with a short and sobbing yes. Chloe mentioned your person lately, and before I came even close to hearing the second half of his sentence, I was struck by an instant shutdown once more. Right when he spoke out this name, the halfway encrusted wound was gaping wide again, so that I quickly turned away from him. I felt him still standing there, otherwise I would have perceived his steps leading away until they faded. It didn't matter what he thought of me, he was a stranger, although a slight recognition was triggered when we were face to face. However, not thinking about the peripheral circumstances as which I interpreted that man, I focused on myself again, trying to breathe instead of sobbing. But right when I could forget him being there, I felt him taking place on the empty chair to my left. I forced myself to appear like a statue, exactly like a prey animal would pretend being dead, just to prompt the predator to leave or something like that. Sadly in my case, it didn't turn out as planned, as the man laid his hand on my back. This time though, I endured whatever he intended to do. He patted a little bit before speaking silently into my ear. Aaron, I want you to know that we are grateful for what you have done to our daughter, and therefore we want to provide you with help if you allow. Though I was attentive and heard his words shimmering through my conceptual ones, I refrained from showing a response. I didn't even know with certainty what he was alluding to. What have I done to Chloe? That name again. And what kind of help could he supposedly offer? I mean, it's not like he's a miraculous healer and casts spells to cure anything. Did Jesus get a haircut or what? My last thought resembled a slight aggression caused by the harsh approach of this man, but in the end I acknowledged that he only wanted to help. So last but not least, I calmed myself down and let my gaze float over to him. I saw merely his silhouette, as my vision was so blurred that I was close to being blind. But ultimately, after ambitious efforts, I managed to look into his eyes. Indeed, I knew this man from somewhere. Ad hoc, I thought of her dad, but for a direct confrontation, I had way too many gaps. I nodded consecutively and paid gratitude with a rough, exhausted voice. Thank you. For more, I had no breath. Furthermore, I didn't know what else to say anyway. Look, Aaron, I mean, you were somehow able to make her laugh again. Not like that fake expression being used to camouflage one's actual mood, but a real laugh. And I've never seen her smile like that, at least not after the diagnosis. What I want to say is that you seem to be very important to her, and hence you are important to us. After all, you seem to have a much closer relationship to her than we do right now, and we are her parents. I really don't want to over-dramatize things, but I think you are essential in granting her a pleasant remaining time. Aaron, see, I have wasted too much time clarifying my expectations to her, criticizing for her what she's not, instead of appreciating her just the way she is, or how she was. But ultimately, with the looming loss, I learned my lesson. Because some only learn the value of something or someone when they tend to lose it. I don't know your point of view, but after she told us about you, we had to admit that there was something very deep connecting the two of you. I'm telling you this because the last thing I wish for you is that you upbraid yourself for the same matter. Further, I want her to leave happily as far as possible, and you are a tremendous factor in this regard. So in case you're ready, please join us inside. We will be waiting. If you intend on leaving, however, then I want you to know that you already made 3 people very happy with what you have done so far, especially one of them. Anyway, alternating with my gaze between the table and the man, I saw him then standing up and trudging into the direction he most likely came from. A small percentage of me was flattered, but for the most part I was occupied with fighting for a way to go. In this aspect, the little motivational speech or whatever that was supposed to be only brought me deeper into the mire of aimlessness. I didn't know at all what I should respond to. My mind was telling me to leave and to forget everything, to aim for a normal life, to find a normal girl, and to live in quotation marks happily ever after. But my heart was telling me to go inside and to keep the promise I gave her half an hour before in utter unity. To accept that she's the one, disregarding her physical condition, and furthermore accept that nothing and no one was ever capable of bestowing my heart with such intense beats that resembled almost the proverbial somersaults. It was basically nothing more than the most important intersection of my entire life so far. The decision between deep heart-centered living or the life determined through the superficial mind.